on a Thursday evening. This is our second event in the library since the library reopened, second in-person event. So thank you very much. Really, we had no idea. I was like, oh, maybe people are going to show up, but we really appreciate that you all came out. I'm Ara Oshagan. I'm a co-curator along with my partner, and who looks like a flower sitting there in that corner, Untitled Chapter. We co-curate the exhibition space downstairs, ReflectSpace. We deal with social justice issues, typically Armenian genocide, Korean confinement, Japanese internment, slavery. We've done a lot of different exhibitions, and we are very fortunate this time to have an exhibition about climate change. And that's what our event here is today with our artists and our activists. We're going to talk about different aspects of climate change. We were very fortunate in this exhibition to work with the Glendale Tree Stories Project, who's led by Catherine Williams. And let me read a quick bio of Catherine. She has been part of the Glendale City's forestry section since 2018. She's an ISA certified arborist, municipal specialist, and has been working in and around landscaping field in the Los Angeles area for the last 10 years. So I'm gonna let Catherine here speak about the project.
Hi, I just wanted to say a quick hello. I'm Catherine. I'm the arborist technician at the city, and as Ara said, the director of the Tree Stories Project. So at the city, what I do is administer the protected tree ordinance, and that means most of the time I am helping people follow the rules so they don't get into trouble. But what I think about a lot is the very first paragraph of the tree ordinance, which basically says Glendale cares about trees. So to me, that first paragraph is just as important to try to reinforce and make come alive really as any other part of my job. And that is basically how this project was born. So I have to say a big thank you to my supervisors at the Department of Public Works who let me run with this project, even though it's a little bit out of the ordinary, of course, for something we would do in maintenance services. I have to say a big thank you to California Humanities for giving us the $20,000 grant that allowed us to produce this project. And it's so wonderful to stand here in the library. A huge thank you to library staff and to ReflectSpace for inviting us in and letting us be a part of this event. So really this project was easy because Glendale really does care about trees. And one of the best parts of this project and also my job is that there's always some new tree story around the corner. To that point, I am really excited to introduce our next guest, Leila Sahabi. We met Leila just a couple weeks ago at the Earth Day pop-up fair. We were hosting our project there, and Leila introduced herself, came up, we talked, and it turned out completely independently, of course, of this project. Leila is a really accomplished writer. She's been working on a novel about her Chevy Chase Canyon home, and she wrote a poem for us on the spot at the Earth Day event. So I'd like to invite her up now to read that poem for us to kick off the show. So introducing Leila.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity for me to be here tonight. I am honored to be a part of this project, and I believe that if we work together, we can help to save the earth. Just like every human, every tree has a story, and here's one that I wrote, and I'm sure that it will resonate with many of you. So, from the rings of the tree. From the rings of a stump that was once a tree, a story is told for the world to read. Long ago, a tiny sprout rose out of the ground. Hundreds of years passed, and it grew tall, watching, silent, still, as creatures around it lived and died. The tree was a home, a constant companion, safety to everyone around. It gave life. But the machines grew in power as the tree grew in height. Smog filled the air, leaving the tree to pump oxygen harder than ever before. The machines, evil and loud, brought the entire forest down. Once tall, majestic, proud, the tree was sad as it lay on the ground. But from the stump, destroyed and in pain, a sapling sprouted to rise again.
Thank you so much, Leila. Thank you so much for this beautiful beginning to our event. And so now I want to introduce our guests tonight, and then we're going to ask some questions, and we're happy to welcome questions from you, and maybe we'll have a conversation going here if we'll see how it goes, yeah? Okay, so first, to my immediate right is Luciana Abate, who was born in Argentina and currently lives and works in Los Angeles. Her multimedia works deal with climate change, environmental awareness, immigration, displacement, assimilation, and adaptation. Abate's artworks have been shown widely in the United States, Europe, Latin America, and Asia, and solo shows in galleries, museums, and international art fairs. Her recent projects have been shown at 18th Street Art Center, Brand Art Library and Art Center. Currently, she has a couple of huge works up at the Brand Center, if you have a chance to go see it. At the California Museum of Art in Thousand Oaks, at LAX, and the Palm Springs Museum of Art. She has completed numerous public art commissions and installations. Abate is the recipient of the 2016 Santa Monica Individual Artist Fellowship Award and the Art Lives Here Award by the Geffen Playhouse in 2022. Her work has been featured in the art newspaper, Los Angeles Times, Harper's, Aesthetica, and Stir World, among others. And I have to say that I first saw Luciana's work at the 18th Street Art Center. So if you go down to the gallery, her work is the large map that's on the wall. This kind of fragile map, seems like it's going to be there forever, but also at the same time it's kind of falling apart. And we're very fortunate that she agreed to bring that work here and display it here in a new configuration. Right. Thank you, Luciana. In the middle here is Stephanie Landragun. Yeah, is that right? Landragun is the director of the Landscape Architecture Program and the Horticulture and Gardening Program at UCLA Extension. Her studio focuses on collaboration with government agencies on providing solutions via community-based design. Her areas of teaching include natural systems design, green infrastructure, storm water design, community facilitation, water conservation design and installation, and pollinator design. She is also a beekeeper, which I just found out, which we're going to talk about hopefully a little bit later. Stephanie is the government's landscape architect appointee to the State Mining and Geology Board and on several commission roles in the city of Glendale. In 2014, she was chosen as one of the first 40 women as an LA Biz Women of Influence. Stephanie received her Master's of Science in Project Management from UW Platteville in 2021 and is a registered licensed landscape architect in the state of California. In 2021, she became a certified apprentice beekeeper with the California Master Beekeeper Program. Stephanie is also a critical advisor to the Glendale Tree Stories project that was just presented here by Catherine and that you can see downstairs. So thank you for being here, Stephanie. To the far right is Elk Pen, also known, a Los Angeles-based artist. Also, her actual name is Christian Kasperovitz. Did I get that right? Also known as Elk Pen. Her practice is a cartographic endeavor, creating a schematic to contextualize the large and complex story about ecology and conservation into something that makes sense in our daily lives. Much of her work departs from the local stories about neighborhoods and their natural history, making visible in urban and human landscapes what is underseen nature itself. She grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and Nova Scotia, Canada. She studied graphic design and drawing at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and the Santa Monica College of Art and Design and Architecture, as well as receiving a BA in anthropology from McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where actually my aunt actually went to McGill. She graduated from McGill. Her work includes murals, which can be found in Mexico, US, and Canada, architectural scale drawings, illustrations, comics, and graphic design, and she has participated in solo and group shows in New York and Los Angeles. Okay, so welcome, everybody. Very happy to have you here. So I'm going to start off with a couple of questions. One of the things that always comes back to me when I think about the environment is this kind of mantra that we've grown up with, actually, this idea of think globally, act locally. It came into our awareness. I think I grew up with it, it seems to me, and it became part of the environmental movement for over many decades. These days, it has apparently been transformed to think globally, act globally also. And I would like to get each of you to reflect on that idea. How is that idea of global and local and that relationship work in your work, in your activism, in your ideas? Just reflect on that, if you like. And whoever would like to start can start.
I could start just because our project that we did with the Glendale Tree Stories was such a local project. It was a community story sharing project that we, as our team, illustrated, and the comics that resulted were part of the city's Instagram feed, and then they became a newspaper, and the project lives on. I think the thing that comes to mind when I think about local and global is, I think there's two things come to mind. One, how does nature work in a local and global way? And the systems that underwrite nature in terms of hydrology, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, if you want to put in simpler terms, oceans, rivers, how clean air is made, how the soil and the microbes and the life inside the soil support all of that system nutrient exchange, and how that, including animals and plants. That system, the laws that govern that system exist in Glendale just as they exist anywhere else on the planet. I think in terms of the human part of that rubric of think globally, act locally, it's hard not to think about systems of power. And while each of us can be really committed individually and committed as we might call ourselves environmentalists, I'm often struck by those conversations that we have, the stories that we share, keep us very busy and distracted from the systems of power that actually keep in place a lot of things that are really damaging to the earth, like the petrochemical industry. So I think one of the things we really need to think about as a community and as individuals is, how do we share our experiences and our love of nature to support and motivate each other to do the hard work to take on big systems, the big global systems. And that is really going to be uncomfortable because we're not used to doing that. But it is possible, and that's really exciting.
You don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable. That's fine. We can, but
No, well, I'm going to talk about this, but from a totally different point
Feel
of
free.
view. Actually, I heard a scientist from UCLA very recently who said something that was very interesting, that sociologists have been studying environmental and how the society is affected by all these issues. And she said that if we show society that there's no way out, that everything, that the environment is doomed, nobody will do anything to try to remedy it, to save it. But if we show people hope, then everybody will work towards finding a solution to it. So I'm an artist, so from my perspective, what I can do individually and what I can contribute to my community, and hopefully that will expand, is to create pieces that
give this moment of joy, of contemplation, and of beauty, and create that sense of hope, and hope in nature. And hopefully through art, people will find hope in real life, and then they will tackle the systems of power. Because as you say, we cannot do anything, as many ideas as we can have on our own. We need to tackle those big ideas, otherwise we cannot do anything. But I think first we need to give them hope. So I think that's very important.
And
Yeah.
that makes me think, I mean, really, as artists, that's so much, whether you're a writer or a visual artist, changing our imagination to be able to picture what an environmental future looks like is really a first step. And that's that sense of hope, that sense of sort of emotional logic, seeing something we don't even know how it actually works. That really is the role that artists can play in taking these first steps towards changing how we live on our planet.
Well, I'd like to ask sort of how we got here. So I think all of us are surprised when we find out that we are now in the middle of extremes. We never thought we would experience wildfires or floods or any of the extremes that are happening. So is it because all of a sudden now that we're seeing these tornadoes, these catastrophic activities, whole towns wiped out, that we're aware? Does it take the extremes for us to look and see what is happening? Because typically, if we have a deadline, I mean, most of us hold on to our money until the bill is due. We're not going to give it to anybody before that due date. So what is the due date for the Earth? My question to us is, if there was an expiration date, you know, there are no expiration dates on those grapefruits, right? You just buy them and you're like, hope to God when you eat it, it's ripe. Or any of the other fruits you buy. There's expiration dates on products that we have, but the Earth does not have an expiration date. So are we going to continue until that expiration date is like in living color or in living no color? So I think it's that we become aware. We don't see the house falling down. We invest in keeping our houses up so their value is up. We have to do the same with the Earth because it is our house. We have to invest in it. We have to make sure that everything we do for the Earth is as a steward. We're the stewards. Now, we could also take advantage of everything the Earth has and give nothing back. But fortunately, we have young people who are smarter than many of the older people, and there is hope. And that's where I think our hope is. And as an educator, I see it every day, and I am so thrilled. Thank you for your poem. It really brought tears to my eyes. And there are so many other wonderful little stories over there. I hope you take a look at them. But we have to become stewards. And we can be stewards as artists and as activists. That's the best way we can do one little step, whether it's taking your silly little water bottle with you everywhere. That's one step. We just have to take baby steps to stop what's happening. And that's how I believe our activism is.
So personal responsibility, right? This is part of what we have to do. Take it personally that this is part of our mission in life to be able to act in a way that does not destroy the Earth, right? And so how do you take personal responsibility in the work that you do, in the activism that you do? You want to talk a little bit, Luciana, about your work, how you create, how you do it, and what are your inspirations for the work that you create?
Yes, well, it is very interesting because I was just asked if I've always dealt with environmental issues. And I've lived in Los Angeles, in California, for the last 16 years. And before that, I lived in Miami. I'm originally from Argentina. And I lived in Miami for 8 years. So I was doing my art in Miami and I was presenting themes of nature. But I wouldn't say that my work was geared towards environmental themes in Miami. But once I moved to California, then I realized that my work had a different meaning, because California has this very strong commitment to environmental issues. And that's when my work changed and became strongly environmentally focused. And I really became more, extremely committed to dealing with environmental issues in my work. So, so basically, since then, all my works deal with environmental issues. At the same time, since, as I told you, I'm originally from Argentina, I've been putting together the two things, my experience as an immigrant with environmental themes, and also how one theme combines with the other. And sometimes, many times, environmental issues then cause immigration issues and vice versa. So that's a little bit about my work. I don't know if you want me to touch a little bit more in particular, but that's a little bit in general.
Okay, I think we can return to that maybe. Yeah, maybe Christian, you can speak a little bit about your inspiration and your personal commitment to the work that you do. You've been doing this kind of work for many years, right?
I have my interest in working on the beginning of my work actually started. I had years ago a job for the Bronx Zoo. It just almost really a chance occurrence, but I was able to go to the back of the zoo and see the tigers up close, and it was so moving. So that got me. It just changed the way I started looking at things. I was lucky to grow up partly in the country and had parents who were tuned into the forest, and we did a lot of canoeing. And I think all those things kind of lit up once I started having these experiences with animals. When currently, something that's really underwritten my work for since I moved back to LA about 20 years ago, is this idea of language. How do you talk about really complex ideas, and ideas that can be pretty upsetting about the environment, in a way that that elicits wonderment and hope from the people who experience the work. And so that's always the challenge that's underwriting things. And I've noticed how much the idea of hope keeps coming up. I hope we grow some legs on hope and really get active.
And language is part of this current work that you're showing here, because it's all about the stories and playing the stories in a graphic,
Very, very much.
pictorial way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something comes to mind. When I first returned to LA, I did a sign project that was a public art project. And in working on that project, it occurred to me how many signs we see every day in our urban environment and what those signs are about. And most of them are about utterly nothing important, and yet they completely clutter our view. And I thought, what if all that real estate we devote to completely just noise, if that were, neat facts about animals and plants and the sky, or how soil works, or the amazing story of mushrooms, which is really becoming like a very more well-known conversation. So that idea of, what do we fill our environment with? What do we fill our imaginations with? What if we turn that around and filled it with something that really lit up our days? the movie Avatar, I think, came really close to being a great environmental movie because of the big blue people, but and the trees who gave life and had this, the blue people needed to have the trees, and yet it never closed the deal. And if we could find together these stories that really change the imaginations of people who aren't thinking about the environment right now, so we can really put power on our side.
I would just like
Please,
to
Stephanie.
say, I don't know if this is on, but I think y'all can hear me. There are a lot of other signs that aren't human signs that are obscured by human signs. So we spend so much time following the neon lights that we don't see the signs. A joyful little moment for me is when I'm at UCLA and I'm walking down the street and there's this sign that says no parking, and there's a bird that has made a nest on top of it. It could care less what it says. And there it is, nesting, because it doesn't say no nesting, it says no parking. But nature has and will win. It will make use of us. We see the coyotes out. I mean, I live up near Oakmont, and the coyotes are there. And I have also a bobcat. And now, I don't know if you all live close enough, I have families of quails that are like little Girl Scout troops running through my backyard. And so nature is going to live with us if we make a place for it. The artists can bring us the awareness that we have moved nature away from us. And then we can take that message and bring it back in. And that's the beauty of, Luciana's work and Christian's work, to me, bring me much closer to nature because I see it through their eyes. And sometimes I'm running around too fast, so I don't see it. And so they are, I think, the canaries in the coal mine. They're telling us, pay attention. We got to do something now. And so that's where our hope comes from, you all being the key messengers.
But you're also involved in landscape architecture as a form of, I understand, political and social activism,
Yeah,
which is a kind of an art form in itself, right? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Well, I think I teach students to become landscape architects. Some of my students are here. But I believe that a landscape architect working with a client re-sanctifies the earth. And why do I say that? Because we are making you and the earth reconnected. And if I can do that, I have a terrific job. The landscape architects are stewards of the earth. We're the only design profession who is taught to be stewards of the earth. Architects are taught to build comfortable, wonderful places. You get into civil engineer, they are taught to move stuff from one place to the other as efficiently as possible. Landscape architects deal with natural systems and they work with them. So I believe that there are places on this earth that we can go out to and return to sacredness. And I think all of us think of our parks. Go to your national parks. They're pretty sacred places, aren't they? They're fabulous. So anyone who can make a place for respite, for vacation for you, to take you out of the hubbub, that is important work. And that is why I became a landscape architect. I used to work with dinosaurs, quite frankly. I worked at a natural history museum, and I'm allowed to put dinosaur exhibits up, but I had to get out. So I'm happy with what I've chosen to do.
That's quite a leap there. I want to mention quickly about the other artist who's actually, her work is downstairs. Hopefully everybody got a chance to see it. If you didn't see it, please go downstairs and see the work. And Johansson's work, she lives in Florida, and she's going to be with us today. But what she does is she's photographed all over the world. She's tried to visually represent some of the issues, impacts, causes of climate change through photography. And some of them are kind of surprising to me. For instance, she was just in Brazil and she photographed cows because the methane gas apparently that cows emit are very harmful to the environment. I wanted to get a little bit into that part of it. Talk about a little bit about some of the causes that we're seeing that Stephanie mentioned. The now we're seeing a lot of drought and firestorms. We can get into a little bit about that, about some of the causes that why we're here, what happened that we're at this point today.
Well, most of these causes are human caused. We create greenhouse gases. I think that's all of us look at that. So how do we deal with that? Methane is one of them. We see a lot of investment in wind, solar. It's not going to take the place. And coal burning is how we all live. Even if you have an electric car, you plug it in and it comes from a generation that may be coal burning. And as each of us looks at how do we lessen our footprint, I think we see that this is human generated greenhouse gases. And I drive a Prius. Boy, was I happy when I had that Prius when those gas prices hit over $6. But before that, I did it because I really felt it might be the right thing to do when it came up. So each of us do little things. We can write a poem, make a big difference. We can take out our grass. We're going to only be able to water 2 times a week in Glendale. If you were in LA, you only can water 1 day a week. What is going to live? I plant plants, right? Am I going to have a job? That's the question. Is that important? Is it more important that I have a job or that we have water? So that's a balancing. That's a question I have to ask. So we have to ask these hard questions. Christian said we have to ask the hard questions. So those are some of what we have to look at. Do we drive less? Do we take more public transportation? Most of us don't like to take public transportation right now because of the pandemic, and we're afraid of each other. And we have a little bit of transition here to get back and start loving each other because, it's scary. But I think that we're going to have to do something, and each of us has to decide what it is we're going to do. I can't decide for you, but we all do have to do something.
I think a really important part of what we can do is contextualize what our life here is in terms of how the planet works. And I think we're in a very tricky spot because they've actually done, this is sort of bad news, so I apologize. They've done a lot of studies that show that individual action actually makes quite a small impact on the state of climate right now. That really what needs to happen is change at the systems level. But what we can do as individuals, and so what's really important in that part of the equation is that this question of responsibility, we absolutely all it would be great that we all really took account of who we are and what we do, but let's not let that obscure who's really responsible. And that is part of the commercial world that we live in, this consumer world that we live in. The plastics industry has always told us that it's up to us to recycle instead of them to make plastics that degrade in 90 days in a landfill. There are so many parts to what has made the climate tilt over to the situation that it's in. Agriculture is a big part of it. What we eat every day makes a huge difference. Cutting beef out of your diet does actually make a really enormous difference. Cattle not only output methane gas, but critical forests are cut down in order to raise beef, and that really is such an enormous cost when you look at Brazil, for instance. So if we as individuals can understand when we go into the grocery store and we see food and ask, where did this food come from? Do I need this much food? Do I need this much of anything? Do I need such a big house? Do I need my house to be as cool as it is or as hot as it is? And if then we can share those conversations, if we can start talking when we have dinner parties or we go to do something fun, or we talk about these things that are right now not part of our dialogue unless we're at a talk like this. Make that an everyday thing. If young people start writing scripts for movies that talk about this, TV shows that are about this, introduce the earth into our popular culture. The thing, and I feel, I'm sorry, it might sound a bit negative. The thing that is really cool is that nature is mind-blowing. It is so amazing the way these systems work. Like if you think of a butterfly, a caterpillar hatches out of an egg. That caterpillar will increase in size 1,000 times in its lifetime. It goes through these instar periods. And each instar, it breathes in a lot of air, so it stretches out its skin, so it has enough room to grow in its next phase. I mean, imagine if we as humans increased 1,000 times in our lifetime. And then it goes into its chrysalis stage, and it attaches by the end of itself and grows a chrysalis around it, and inside it becomes complete caterpillar soup. There's no body left in there at all. It's just mush. But on the outside of the chrysalis, which is the name of the cocoon for a butterfly, you can actually already see the pattern of the butterfly's wings and what it will one day look like. And that soup turns into a butterfly. And a butterfly, they say, like the eyes of a butterfly have so many facets on it, like 1,000 different facets on each eye, that when they see each other, it's like technicolor. They see so many more colors than we do. They can taste things with the pads of their feet. And the scales on their wings, if you blow them up under a microscope, they're all sorts of different, they look hard, actually. They look like they're made out of metal, and they've studied those to build fighter jets. And it's like, that's one creature. And you think about like all the TV shows we watch that are really about the same story over and over and over again. And then you think about these stories and you're like, wow, that's great.
That is, no, that is, no, that is tremendous, and thank you for that description of the multitude of possibility that's out there if we just look close enough. And I think that's what a lot of artwork does. And I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about art and process a little bit, and want to ask you, Luciana, to speak about a little bit about your work downstairs. Tell us what inspiration was, or what the underlying concept and other things that you want to share about that work.
Sure. Well, I think I started this work, as I told you, I'm from Argentina. So a lot of my work is derived from my immigrant experience. And but then I want to create artwork that has a universal message. No, I don't only want to talk about myself. So I work with photography, and many of those photographs then become life-size installations. So the map that you saw at ReflectSpace downstairs, it started as a photograph of like a an actual map that became a mountain, and it talked about, and it had tiny ladders, and it talked about immigration and refugees. In those times, I created that piece in 2015 when we started seeing reading in the news the war in Syria and the first refugees that were trying to cross the Mediterranean Ocean. And it's interesting. Well, so I created that photograph, and a curator who visited my studio, or it was an artist, she said, "Oh my God, this photograph, have you ever thought about creating a life-size, a 3D piece out of this photograph?" And I kept thinking about that until in 2018, I had the opportunity to have a residency at Building Bridges Art Exchange in Santa Monica, where I could really actually build those mountains out of maps in real size. So I printed 100 meters of giant maps of all the countries of the world, and I created these huge mountains. And it's entitled Off the Map, because the idea is when any spectator stands by these huge mountains, where all the countries of the world are shown there, you feel like you're off the map. You see the countries, but you can't belong there. So in a sense, you feel a little bit like that immigrant, that refugee that has no access to a country where all the borders have been closed. And at the same time, those mountains are made out of paper, so you really cannot climb on them. So again, it's the idea of feeling off the map, of something that is totally unattainable. And the countries in the map are rearranged in totally random order. There's no logical order, so it talks a lot about the state of the world. And, in 2018, it talked about wars and displacement in general and environmental issues, and then it talked about the pandemic, the state of the world with the pandemic, and now with the new current affairs, we are talking about new dramatic and tragic political issues. So, this piece acquires new meaning, unfortunately, as time goes by.
Yeah, it's very interesting how work that you may create many years ago, you revisit, and like you said, it has a new meaning. And it has, when I first saw it, it wasn't about immigration. It was really, and as it stands downstairs, it's like an iceberg almost, and it's like this fragility of the planet. Immediately, I connected to the environmental dimension of it. But it's so interesting that it started someplace else. And the process, the artist's mind is always working, right?
Yeah.
Always reconsidering everything that you do, and nothing is ever forgotten.
Yeah, actually, what I didn't tell you is that another very important series of my works are icebergs, and so those mountains also represent those icebergs. So it has that connection to all the environmental issues of, those could be icebergs that could melt, and all the countries could disappear.
Right.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So, Christian, could you speak a little bit about the work we have downstairs? So, hopefully you saw it, and there's still many years or many months you've been working with different people telling their stories about Glendale and their relationship with trees. Could you give us a little bit of background of that whole process so that the audience has a better idea of what they're looking at, especially when they see your work downstairs?
Sure. Downstairs, we created 30 stories, illustrated stories. The public would send stories into Catherine's department, and the three of us, Stephanie, Catherine, and I, would talk through those stories and think about how each of those stories related to some broader concepts about trees and the green environment of Glendale. And to go to your point, Ara, at the very beginning, sort of some even larger kind of issues about the environment. And then we would kind of distill some of the ideas we thought were most important. And then it was my job as the artist to illustrate those stories and adapt some of the text so it fit in the flow of 6 to 10 frames of a story. Yeah, I really feel like I was part of that. That getting out in front of it as an artist doesn't feel like the right place to be, because it's really a project that was made by many voices and many points of view. The comics all have, there's a variety of drawing styles that I think sort of represents all the different textures of the stories that came in. I think when we began, we weren't entirely sure where it was going to go. And I think it really touched all of us in working on the project, how much love came through the stories, like this sense of real, like emotional connection to trees. And I think what we all hoped for in wrapping up the project is that in representing those stories, that we can see trees as ambassadors for something larger, because for forests and for systems that trees are a part of, whether it's making oxygen for us to breathe or moving water and nutrients through the soil, but that trees are really kind of a gateway to a bigger story about nature in the city.
It was wonderful working with these two women, Catherine and Christian, because we would get a story from an individual in LA who would say, "Oh, I love my mulberry tree," okay, because and it's from Armenia because they're bigger mulberries than the ones you have here, and that's true. So they were so excited about their tree, and those stories of love of the tree and what the fruits gave, and us doing the research on it, and Christian taking that story and making it into a story she's brilliant and magical, and she did a terrific job. If you look at all of the stories, you're going to see little pieces of love in there, where she talks about the butterflies that like one plant over another, and she talks about the fruits of one plant, and she talks about the history of where this tree came from and the person who told it. And the mulberry story is Ed Hagobian, and Ed, I don't know if you all know Ed Hagobian, he's an architect here. And he and I I used to be on the planning commission, and Ed and I would talk about planning things sometimes. He always talked about his mulberry tree. So I said, you have to talk to Ed about his mulberry tree. So these are ways that we're connected. And not only are we connected, but the stories are so beautifully told by Christian. I hope you have a chance to look at all of them. The little newspaper that is there is wonderful, but those stories, we talked about little pieces of it. The whole magic of those stories are you.
Mm-hmm. And feel free to take the newspapers. These are all available back there. Christian's work there, and what, and and on the board there, on the wall there, you can see some of the responses that Glendaleans library patrons have written downstairs. So you can also write a story if you haven't written your relationship to a tree. You can go downstairs and get a postcard, and we have a mailbox also, the Glendale Tree Stories mailbox, and you can put your story there. And you know, it was also very interesting to me when we put this project up, lots of people connected to the big tree in Verdugo Park. It was like constantly people said, "Oh yeah, I know that tree. Oh, I know that. I know that tree." And it was one of these things that I knew it too, but it never occurred to me that it would be one of these sort of symbols of Glendale almost, because everybody knew it, and this tree kind of became the stand-in for kind of, you know, hopefully, you know, that tree will replace the Americana as what Glendale stands for in a regional way. Yeah. Can we do that, Christian? Can we work on that? Yeah. We should plant a big mulberry tree. Yeah. Yeah, at the Americana. Yeah. But I want to, if there are people, I'd like to open the floor to any questions, comments that you would like to make. I know some people here have written stories that have submitted to the Glendale Tree Project, Stories Project. So feel free, somebody has, yes, please. Would you like to, no? If you have to speak, can you project? Yeah? Yeah, yeah.
What are you thinking? For example, yeah, I can tell you, for example, two particular instances. I developed a series in 2017 that is called Water Cities Los Angeles that I showed at LAX, at Los Angeles International Airport. It was not inspired by a particular moment, but after living many years in Los Angeles, and I saw the relationship of this city with water, whether it was the lack of water or the excess of water, because we either have dramatic droughts or terrible floods. I created all this series where I had aerial photographs of landmarks of Los Angeles, and the different landmarks were invaded by water. So the Dodger Stadium had become a swimming pool. The Walt Disney Concert Hall had also become a swimming pool, and I added a ladder on the side of the Walt Disney Concert Hall, like it became a swimming pool. The 405 highway became a river, so it was covered in water. The I-10 was covered in water.
Sounds like a good kind of transformation for the forum.
Then I presented another landscape where I presented an aerial view of Hollywood, and the sky of Hollywood had become a swimming pool. So you could see a person swimming in the sky. So that's one series that is directly related to that. And then another series, my Iceberg series, was inspired in 2017 by an article that I read on CNN about a piece of iceberg that had broken off Antarctica. And it has a name, but I can't remember. It's the A and then a number. And scientists were trying to figure out where that piece of iceberg would end up, because it was floating aimlessly in the ocean and nobody knew where it was going to end up. So everybody, like scientists, were very worried because it was really huge. And that inspired my whole series of Iceberg series, because I also related it to my immigrant experience. So I made parallelisms of myself as an immigrant floating and moving in the ocean between one country and another. And so that's how I sometimes relate environmental issues to personal issues. So that's how sometimes specific environmental issues inform my work.
And it's an environmental issue. Isn't immigration an environmental issue? I mean, people are leaving countries that are becoming uninhabitable through both environmental desecration and war. So immigration is a big environmental issue.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely the idea that art also is associated where you could think locally, but also create work that thinks globally itself, but also could exist now globally, because through social media, right, some work can exist globally. So that idea that you can get a message out, perhaps. in some way out to a much wider audience now. So we can think globally and act globally. Right. Yeah, did you want to answer the inspiration question? 1 second. Yeah.
I think what comes to mind for me is I don't think it's a particular environmental issue, though I feel the environmental situation very acutely every day. But I'm really inspired by animals, and I am fortunate. I live in the San Gabriel foothills, and so I've got a lot of animals moving around our property, and that slowing down to kind of see the experience of the animal. It sounds a little kooky, but I like to greet the birds and greet the trees in my yard, and I think for me, talking to these parts of nature makes me feel like, makes me touch their consciousness a little bit more. In a lot of my personal drawings, I draw the environment, the earth features with faces, because I feel like, or I had a comic once that said, you know, if you were a rock, you could see that the tree is moving, because it's in looking at animals and then plants relatedly. I think it gives us an opportunity to see a different kind of consciousness that exists on the planet, and that we share this space with a whole bunch of different consciousnesses. And they're finding all these, you know, they just recently said that lobsters and scallops are sentient beings. And I think for a long time we've underestimated just how the rest of the earth is alive. We just thought, oh, it's like, oh, it's just trees, and it's just some animals, and it's just plants, and it's just dirt. But I think if you slow down, like even rocks like emanate some kind of feeling. And if we can touch that individually, I think that's incredibly motivating to want to do something, not just for ourselves, but for those parts of it.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for this gathering. It's very inspiring. And my 8-year-old, who I do very young. With the cookies, he's with the cookies. Yes, but it's something interesting that I have been trying to explore things professionally. Let me share with you and ask you how potentially we can communicate this message in the home that can meet really different, those systematic differences that belong to us. That is community resilience and disaster preparedness. Everybody, you know, you could say 100 times the resources and carbon footprint for repair, for fire, for earthquake, for flood, and so on. Imagine all these structures. So how can these communicate? You know, usually people don't listen to us disaster preparedness, the last thing they work on. And so is there anything within your field that somehow that messages in a way people can really move them to do something about it?
I think that's a really interesting question. The first thing that comes to mind for me as a place to start is considering the natural history of Los Angeles. I think a lot of us misunderstand the landscape that we live in. And if we have a little bit more awareness about how the land actually works here, because just as there are human systems and industrial systems, there are earth systems, and those systems can be quite local. So, for instance, the hydrology here is incredibly important. And we have a Western river, and I think that it's interesting that I'm going to switch back up for a second. We have a habit of thinking about nature, the nature we live in, as one thing. So nature is green, trees are good, a river has water in it. But Los Angeles, as a southwestern city, is quite different than that. We have the natural state of the river is actually that we have a huge aquifer system here, and the river is seasonal. And if you start to think about that and think about how water, I mean, the river supported the city until 1904. And then we ran out of water, and then we started importing water from far away. And if we understood when we're watering our yard, where our water comes from, where it actually, the idea where, what's happening with rainwater now, that the reason when it rains, we lose almost all of the water that falls because it falls into a cement system and it goes right out to the ocean. So we're losing this enormous resource for ourselves. And this doesn't get exactly to your point, but I think if we understand where we live, that LA was built as a garden city. We actually are not that sense of like a green kind of paradise was what lured people out here. That was what they sold lots with in order to build neighborhoods, just like Glendale. So if we have a little bit better sense of the kind of natural history of things, that we live in an area that evolved, plants and trees co-adapted with each other to be fire resilient. And so having those kind of trees around us, replicating some of the natural landscape helps us be more fire resilient. Replicating some of the way that water moves across land in our yards with swales helps us be more flood resistant. And removing this idea that our outdoor space always has to be a lawn, always has to be a garden. Even that front area, it's so funny that we use all our front yards as lawns that are very impersonal, really. You walk down a street and it's just kind of empty. But if we're building a sense of resiliency, and we see this growing in the city, using our outdoor spaces to create gardens for food, create gardens for pollinators. And I think one of the really interesting things that Stephanie mentioned, part of resiliency really comes from supporting the natural systems that are here already, which is healthy soil, and that just healthy soil promotes everything that comes after it, the plants, and then you have pollinators, and then you have birds, and then you have small mammals. And so if we can start to connect, if we understand how important that is, that if soil is healthy, we are healthy, and we start connecting public places like parking lots, schoolyards, traffic medians as green spaces that are resilient in and of themselves, that they have healthy soil, that they're creating pollinators, that just helps us picture what resiliency looks like, helps us learn more about it, and maybe bring it into our own yards.
Well, I think it's a fascinating thing that you say, because we've sort of decided someone else is going to take care of protecting us. And we We have pipes that come in our house and bring us water, and so we don't acknowledge where that water comes from. We take showers willy-nilly. I mean, if you're a teenager, you probably have a huge water bill because teenagers are not aware of how much water they use. But I'm not trying to be bad here. But the other thing is that we have seriously contracted with government to take care of so much of this instead of assuming a responsibility. And so, and this is a huge health and safety issue. If we knew we had to work together to make sure that we weren't going to have fires coming in, but we allow people to build right up to the wilderness area. And so what if the wilderness catches fire and it catches fire to the houses? The wilderness is at fault. Is it not the responsibility of the people who built it to build more responsibly? We allow things. I mean, as I said, we're looking for that expiration date before we have to pay. And frankly, we're going to keep finding it. If you lived in paradise, it's no longer paradise. If you live in areas where, regardless of what the natural systems are, you're going to take your chances, that is a terrible gamble. So I think it's a terrific question. How can we do that? How can we re-educate ourselves? Do we have, go back to grade school and have fire drills? I don't know. I think it's probably very important that we start looking at self-sufficiency and resilience as opposed to dependency on whatever government is going to be there. And so I think it's a great question. I think it's something that we're going to have to embrace. And how we do that, we can talk about it. I'm sure you have some ideas. I'd love to work with you on it.
We'll take, I think one more question. Are we good on time? I think. Catherine, please. Of course, yes. If somebody has a question for Leila, yeah.
Yeah, so the book that I'm currently working on publishing was inspired by this hawk. It sits on the power line above Chevy Chase Canyon, and one day I was just looking at it and thinking, okay, what is his backstory? Why does he always just sit there? And so I wrote one.
I just love that you looked at part of the natural world, like a non-human part of the world, and asked, without a second thought, asked a question about, well, how do they feel? And what's their backstory? And I think that's exactly the kind of spirit that is really a change maker. It's really great.
Thank you. And
Have you named
it's just
it?
fun. No, we still just call him the hawk, but that's a good idea. We should come up with a name. I'm not sure. Okay, well, my dad says end of the year.
Your agent and your dad.
Mostly just random ideas. And this one time I was looking at the clouds and thinking, well, those are some interesting shapes in the clouds that would make a really cool story. And that's something I'm planning on writing soon. So yeah, that too. I mean, it's a way to kind of get people to learn the lesson without realizing they're just listening to me teach a lesson. They're hearing the story, and yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a good way to get people to learn is to basically have them put themselves in the animal shoes. So no.
The Hollywood Hills. Sure. Right.
Any other questions? Okay, then. I want to thank our guests here for a very, very informative. We get a round of applause for our guests. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming on a Thursday evening. And please take time to look at the work, look at the work downstairs. The library is open till 9 o'clock. And come back again. We have exhibits coming up. Next exhibit, ReflectSpace, is about a Yemeni kitchen. We're rebuilding a kitchen in our gallery. And stories are told around the kitchen table. These are going to be audio stories and in an actual kitchen that's going to be reconstructed. So come back and see us.
And go to the brand to see Luciana's work.
Oh, yes. And visit our sister gallery, the brand. Her work is there, and a fantastic show up there. So thank you again. Thank you for coming, and have a good evening.